And that was the confirmation. Awesome. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us for our final chapter chat of the spring semester and academic year. So today we'll be talking more about end-of-year transitions, so both in regards to your executive board and your leadership transitions, but also just in terms of project transitions and ensuring that you're ending the year in a good spot for the incoming e-board and organization at the start of the school year. So we'll be going through a few things to keep top of mind, and then just having an open discussion on things that are on your mind or anything that you feel you want to talk through. And so with that, the agenda will be, first off, a few points that we put together as a group and thought would be helpful to share with you. And then after that, we'll transition into more of an open discussion around those points, or again, anything that's on your mind. As always, feel free to keep chatting with us on the global Slack. We're all on that. You can tag us individually or as chapter leaders. You can tag each other. And, just make sure you're receiving emails from us. If you're here, you probably already are. But if it doesn't sound familiar to you, just feel free to talk to either your president or someone in your chapter about getting plugged into ESW emails. As a quick reminder, we just did intros, but we're your chapter relations team. So we each work with a few chapters and are all here to help answer your questions and just serve as a point of reference between ESW HQ and US chapters. As always, the goal of this call is just to really be a resource for you. So feel free to jump in anytime. You don't have to sit and wait for us to open the discussion. If you want to talk about something or ping in the chat, feel free to do so. And all that being said, this is our last chapter chat of the spring semester. We had our first one on member retention and engagement, which were two pain points that we'd heard from a lot of chapters this year, kind of coming out of COVID. So that was recorded. It's on YouTube if you want to catch up on what was discussed there. And then we had a kind of different style event in March around speed mentorship, where we paired professional mentors with students. So that was a little bit different than our typical format, but we're aiming to do that again in the future. So if that is interesting to you, keep an eye out for an email about that, probably in the fall or next spring. So now to the topic of the day. So end of year project and leadership transitions. So on the next slide here is it's a lot of text, but basically it's some things that were top of mind for us having been in chapters and having worked with chapters for a few years now. So we tried to organize our thoughts into a few buckets here and put down some things that were relevant to us or that we've heard. So we'll go through those, and then again, you feel free to jump in with any questions or thoughts at any point.
Right, and just as like an overview, as you finish the year, especially if you are a senior and are graduating, or if a fair number of people on your board or leading projects are, the goal of this is to make sure that nothing is lost from one board and one set of leadership to the next one, or from one year, the end of spring semester to the fall. Sometimes in the shuffle, you can forget something or lose a password or, not know where a project is kept when you get back in the fall. So the goal of going through all of this is really just to make sure that in this sort of end of year time of transition, you are able to sort of keep track of everything that needs to happen in order to make that transition smooth.
Yep, exactly. So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so we'll just kind of walk through the text on this and kind of go into a little bit deeper thought on each of the checklists and basically how they might relate to your chapter and things that you might kind of want to check off. So first thing, the main thing we wanted to talk about was budgeting and funding. These are some of the most important things, some of the most important passwords, access to your account, access to your funds. So, accessing accounts, make sure you have all your passwords or where you keep all your funds and budget in a central place so you can pass it on to the next year's leadership. Also managing any external funding requirements that can range anything from applying to grants. Maybe it's a yearly grant that you have, or yearly grants that you can apply for every year to get funding for the year, or corporate sponsorships, past corporate partners that you've had in the past, how much they've paid, things like that. It's important to keep all this information going, and make sure to pass it on. The next thing would be your executive board transitions. Obviously, that entails elections or applications or nominations, however that transfer of leadership goes over. But with that transfer of leadership, one thing we found really important is documenting each role's descriptions. For example, the president would have a transition document kind of telling responsibilities, important access info, important contacts, things like that, as well as you could start opening up your executive board meetings to, potential applicants or nominees, or after you've elected your new officers for the year, have them shadow maybe one or two of the end of the year executive board meetings, just so they get an understanding of what's required of them. And obviously all the account information, where that includes emails, Google Drives, listservs, email lists, anything along that regard, just make sure you have it all in a central place, so everyone will have access to it and you don't lose any access to different accounts.
Hey Matt, on the topic of like e-board transitions, I just wanted to highlight like how we did transitions at UT. I think it's like was a really great way. It might work for your chapters, but essentially once we had elected or selected the incoming officer board, the incoming and the outgoing president would meet with each incoming and outgoing person with that position. So basically just facilitating a meeting and kind of encouraging all this stuff, like documenting the roles, and people that were outgoing would kind of write down their, like Matt said, like their main roles or the things that they needed to do throughout the year. But that might be a good opportunity just for the president to understand what each of the roles does, and kind of has a good groundwork moving into the next school year. So something to consider is just having those meetings. It's a lot of legwork, but I think it's really valuable to have that time with each of the officer positions.
Yeah, it's thanks for bringing that up. It's definitely a great option. It's basically an exit interview for each role, and it's super important just so you can keep growing every year rather than kind of do the same thing over and over. You learn from past year's mistakes and keep moving on from there. So that's great. Moving on to our next kind of point, unless anyone has anything they want to add in to budgeting or funding or executive board transitions. No, oh, okay, I'll keep moving on. So university operations or requirements, what that kind of entails is kind of just all the admin work your club might need to do. Some universities, you might need to register as an official club for the year, just starting off the year. That can be in the summer, that can be end of the year, that can be beginning of the year, but sometimes you need to register as an official student org, whether it's with your university, with the engineering school, something along those lines. It could be a number of things. Another very important thing is if you hold weekly, bi-weekly, even monthly meetings, and you hold it in a classroom or a certain room on your campus, there's a lot of room reservation systems a lot of universities use. So being aware of those dates when it opens up ensures you have the best pick of the rooms that you want, whether it's the best location, the biggest meeting room, the nicest, whatever you want. So having those dates of when those things open up can be really key to, help make your year more successful. The next I would say is listserv management. And what that is just basically all your email lists for, incoming students, current members, outgoing alumni, things like that. Just making sure you're constantly updating your email lists, making sure they're up to date, making sure they're still going out, and just managing that. And finally, just adhering to different safety trainings and requirements. If sometimes certain projects you'll have, maybe they'll be in a lab, there's certain safety certifications you have to have, things like that. So any projects that might have something that has that's a little more intense may have additional safety certifications that you need to keep up with every year. So you need to be aware of that. Moving on to faculty advisors. Every chapter should have a faculty advisor. This one's super easy. Just make sure you stay in contact with your faculty advisor. What I've done in the past, what a lot of chapters will do in the past is end of the year, once you have your new president, exec board, etc., you'll schedule just a one-on-one meeting with your faculty advisor with the incoming president, just to do the introductions, let them know who they are, and kind of work out a schedule that works best for you and your faculty advisor. You know, whether you meet once, twice, 20 times a year, just getting that initial connection is really important to maintaining good relationships. Another big thing would be managing members. And what that really is just ensuring all your rosters are up to date. So all the members that you have, you know, ending the year, the same members coming back, they're all aware of all the information going on. You have contact names, years, lists to make sure you know who's still active, who's still present in the year, and make sure you get an outgoing roster. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add to anything I've said, or should I keep moving on? But if not, I'll keep going. So managing partners. This is a really important one, and I've kind of touched on it before already. And managing partners, it can range from anything from corporate sponsorships to, you know, contacts in the university, your faculty advisor, you know, your student dean, your deans, your different school leaders, and things like that. Different organizations that you may partner with, you know, whether it's, you know, your local ASME or ASE chapter or things like that. It's really important to maintain these partnerships, keep up these relationships, because again, every year you want to be growing, getting better, creating new relationships. And you definitely don't want to be losing these important relationships. A lot of chapters get a lot of money through these corporate sponsorship contacts, so it's really important to know who you've been successful with, who you've had contact with, and just really, you know, help open up that relationship. Who's been your point of contact? You keep contacting them and maintain that relationship, so you're not starting from scratch every year. With that, might tie into different projects. A lot of projects have community contacts and community partners. Just making sure when you end your year and you're moving on, that you do your introductions to the, you know, the community contacts, to the new project leads or chapter leads. Tying into that will be kind of, we'll talk a little more into projects, which are, you know, a huge part of ESW. So a big thing here would be to, you know, have all your documentation in one place, whether it's a Google Drive, on our project database, anywhere, to make sure you have all your information in one specific place. Doing project proposals, whether that's, you know, creating your project proposal or maintaining it. End of the year, kind of to do items, we always have our annual report. And with that, we also need to update the ESW project database. So usually your CRC will tell you that you'll need to do that, but basically just end of the year, making sure you're updating all your current projects in the ESW project database to keep it current, making sure that everyone who takes a look at it has the most updated information. Another important thing would be updating any contact info of the project database. So if anyone looking at it has questions, they know who to contact and they're not contacting dead contacts. Photos, timelines, it's really just important to get all your documentation in your project. Moving on to the new year, and making sure all your timelines are in a clear, concise manner. And finally, some easy stuff with just your HQ and your CRC, just basic good standing requirements. If Emma or Sarah want to delve a little deeper into that, they're probably the better ones to present that.
Yeah, I think the biggest one there in terms of end of year is the annual report. So those who were leads in previous years will be a little bit familiar with this. It's essentially an exit survey interview of for your year. So it'll allow you to put in the past president's names, the past e-board's names, and then the incoming president's names. That way we have a record of who to contact in the fall. And also we'll have some questions around what you had worked on this year, if you were featured in the news anywhere. It gives you opportunity to share that with us. So the goal is kind of twofold. Is number one, for you to have a record of what you worked on and different e-board contacts, but it's also for us as HQ to have a record of that, so that as CRCs might change, then your new CRC is up to date on what you were working on. And then for you, as your leadership changes, there's a record of what was done previously. So that's probably the biggest end of year requirement for good standing, the annual report. And then the other piece that Matt mentioned around the ESW project database is also pretty important. So that, again, kind of helps you, but also helps us have a sense of what you're working on and what you're thinking about. And then for you as chapters, lets you keep track of your own progress and then also see what's going on in other chapters. So as you're thinking about projects for the fall, it could be a good brainstorming place. Other requirements are those regular calls with your CRC, which you'll probably be having your end of year calls soonish, depending on your class schedule and what works best for you. But those are kind of the big points there. And then one other thing that Matt brought up that I thought was pretty important too is the documentation piece around projects. So I've heard a few times that as people graduate, their projects get lost or just kind of fizzle out because the people who are working on them graduated. So that's part of why documentation is so important, is that way you can keep the continuity. And if you have a lot of people graduating, it's extra important then to make sure that you're documenting what you're working on, where you stored it, where it's physically located, if it's a physical piece of work, or if it just designs or documentations where those are stored, like on a Google Drive or elsewhere. Yeah, those are some of the pieces on those last two bullet points.
On the point of like project transition specifically, like we're obviously giving this checklist of like end of year things, but I think it's really important to start this process now. Like even though you might still have like over a month left of the semester, it's really important to get members involved that aren't graduating. So if you are in charge of a project or a specific initiative in your chapter, this is a really good opportunity to like get some younger folks involved in those processes so they see how to, just do a project or how to run a different like various events. It's just really important to get other people involved so you're not the sole person in charge of these events. And then like when you leave, it leaves with you. So, consider having someone shadow you in these last couple months of the school year and just kind of share your knowledge with the younger ESW members in your chapter.
And on that note, it's very easy to be in a mindset of like, oh, I'll have more time during study week or when classes end. And frequently that is not the case, or you don't want to leave things to last minute in case you're stressed about exams or in case something comes up. Starting the process early is always a good idea. And that even goes for like thinking about, next year, like you don't have to wait until the end of the semester to do project documentation or board role documentation. This can be something that is ongoing. Obviously, it's most important to like revisit and make sure it's communicated well at this time of year. But definitely something that you should be keeping in mind sort of all year round.
So I guess kind of having gone through that, would love to open up to a little bit of discussion around, and I'll stop sharing so we can kind of see each other, but discussion around maybe any of those points, or if you want me to leave it up, I can as well. But a discussion around those points, anything else on your mind, any questions that you had, feel free to ask.
Or if your chapter has a very unique way of like transitioning, executive boards or projects or whatever, this is like a great time to share unique things to your chapter in case other chapters are interested in trying new things.
Or if you have any warnings. So part of this list was also, coming from things that we've experienced in our chapters, or that we, so personally, like we had a physical office that we stored things in, and it was not communicated well what the code was to get into it year over year. So every year it was hard for the next board to get in and access anything in the office. So, you know, little things like that that you don't really think about, that you just know that you know. Cautionary tales. So if anyone has anything like that, you know, yes, and feel free to put questions or comments in the chat as well.
So I know one thing that I found helpful was sort of towards the end of the year, when we started to think about like board elections, we would have everyone on the board edit those role documents from the previous year and make sure that like things were updated with how, you know, we did roles that year, or if a new role was created, creating that document. And we would think about doing that before elections instead of after, so that we could share those documents with all of the people who were, well, with the entire chapter, to help people, like if they were considering running for a position, like know and understand what that entailed. But then when you like stepped into a position, that was a really helpful place to start, to see like, okay, you know, during meetings, I'm in charge of this, and during the year, I'm in charge of, you know, these 3 things, and work with this position on that thing. And these are important contacts and to-dos and like resources. And I think having something like that and having it be in a designated folder like year after year, like keeping that continuity, was something that I found really helpful. And there are multiple ways it can be done, but I just, as an example, that was something I thought was a good idea. And some of the things that were talked about in terms of like university processes, that's a good place to document those. So like, you know, as Matt mentioned, if you're the treasurer or the VP of finance, like, you know, information about the timing of budget, when it had to be submitted, who it had to be submitted to, what like typically your like funds were, or like where previous budgets were stored. If you were in charge of events, like how to schedule, like how to reserve rooms, or, you know, like other organizations you had previously partnered with for events. We did this like big like food, like local food event every year. And so like the contact of the person at like Cornell Orchards was really important, because we'd have to contact them for like a special request of apples for this event. And so I think, just right, as Emma said, like room codes, like there are a lot of like little things that you don't realize you've like collected in terms of knowledge throughout the year. And writing it all down, is a nice way to reflect on what you've done throughout the year, but it's also just a really good way to help whoever is stepping into those shoes next get started.
And just to add on to that, when I was at Michigan State, we were still like a fairly new chapter. So something that one of my predecessors did was they started like a position report. So like at the end of the semester, everyone would write like a short description of some of the tasks that they had completed over the semester, along with like contacts and you know, like important emails and just like important little information. And that was something that they started doing, so that, you know, people who were coming in could look at some records and not, you know, have to start fresh and brand new every single school year. And then something that one of my vice presidents did was start like kind of like a project record keeping Excel sheet thing for the project managers to keep track of. So it's basically just like, you know, start date, project description, important contacts, you know, important things that have been accomplished this semester. So those might be some things that, you know, could also be beneficial to your chapter as well. And the chapter that I was in fairly small, so hope that helps.
Yeah, that was one thing we hadn't put on the checklist, but was talked about, was just kind of reflecting on the year, and you know, keeping in mind that just because your board was structured a certain way doesn't mean that it has to be the same way next year. So if you felt like one role was, the person was really overworked and another role person was really not, maybe there's a way that you can merge some of the responsibilities, move them over. if you feel like you really want like a underclassman to participate in some way, maybe make a role for them or make like a junior role for someone so that they can stay involved. So it doesn't have to be like set in stone. What you did 1 year does not be the same thing year over year. So maybe having a discussion with your chapter or doing a survey with your roster of how do you think things went, what could be better. That could also be helpful just to get their feedback. And not everyone will reply, but for those who do, you might get some good feedback there too.
Something that just came to my mind was the idea of like member recruitment at the beginning of the school years. A lot of the time, especially like at the university I went to, we had recruitment throughout the summer that we could do with like incoming freshmen at their like orientation. There were tabling events that orgs could get involved with. So while your school might not have that exact event, it's good to kind of transfer that information, like what events are upcoming where we really like count on that member recruitment. So like, your chapter might be full of a lot of freshmen, and that's because of these recruitment events that happen in the summer, really early on in the school year, that are things that, if you don't start thinking about towards the end of the previous school year, you might be a little too behind to get involved. So, just thinking about recruitment for the next year, how you can get involved and really have a strong start in the next school year.
And even if there are no summer events that you have to do for the summer, having like a new board meeting at some point over the summer, I think is a very helpful thing to do in order to like start the planning process, think about your goals, think about what tasks you're going to have to do to sort of hit the ground running in the fall, because the first few weeks of school, even if it seems like they'll be relatively chill and you won't have too much work, are always very busy. And there are going to be a lot of things you want to do. So getting a head start is definitely something that will help reduce stress come August.
Yeah, I find even having those like at the very end of the school year, once you have your full incoming officer board, like schedule a meeting just like so everyone gets to know each other, and you can start brainstorming ideas like throughout the summer and just get people excited for their new roles.
Make sure you know how to contact everybody. So if they're not looking at their email, have their phone number or group me or Slack or something.
So just curious, and if you guys have questions and you want to jump in, that's fine too. But if you don't have other questions, I'm curious, where in this transition process are each of your schools? Have you already had a board transition? Are you about to? Like what type of documentation have you already started?
I guess I can go first. We're keeping the same board because nobody is graduating. So we're kind of just all keeping our same roles and just continuing for next year.
Oh, that sounds awesome. That makes life a little easier.
Yeah.
Is it a bunch of juniors that are moving into their last year, or is it still spread out?
We're pretty spread out. Like there will be 3 seniors, a junior, and a sophomore.
Oh, nice.
Because
So
there's like 8 of us total. So
that's great. One of my chapters, they were kind of in the same boat last year, where they had a bunch of juniors like stepping into their senior year. And so now they're dealing with the, like, oh my gosh, next year, like our whole board's going to graduate. So, you're in a good position now, and you should capitalize on that over the next year and start bringing in some younger students and just like continue that strong transition to the next school year.
Are there, if you don't want to share it, like totally understand, we're putting you on the spot in this call. Are there any worries that people have or things that you want to like ask about, double check on, like get advice on before you kind of wrap up the school year? Or are you like all set and ready to go?
If you think of things later, you have a CRC to contact, and we are here to help you with those transitions.
I was about to put CRCs on the spot. I guess we're not really at the end of the year chat times, but is there anything that you've heard from chapters that's been raised as a concern? Some things that I've heard in the past have been around staff and faculty advisors, where if one of your advisors is retiring or leaving, how that impacts your org and then finding new ones. So I don't know if that's a situation anyone has on the call, but typically I feel like people have ended up in good spots, but it's been challenging for some more than others, because sometimes your advisor is tied to your workspace or your lab space. So if you lose your advisor, you're also losing in your space. So that's something you can talk to your CRCs about if you are in that situation. Otherwise, your university will usually work with you. I think sometimes, not always, it's a requirement of some clubs to have an advisor, so they might mandate you have one, and then it's a matter of finding one or maybe multiple who can support you. But just know that that's not the first time that's happened. So if you are worried about that, or that becomes a problem for you, that's what you can talk to your CRC about, or one of the deans in your university, or whoever helps with the administrative part of your work.
We've mentioned the annual report a couple times, and you'll definitely get more information about that. But I think that's also a good opportunity to work as like an outgoing and incoming leadership team, kind of work on that document together. And it's good for incoming leadership to kind of understand what parameters HQ is looking for throughout the year, and kind of get those people, those incoming officers, thinking about stuff that they should document throughout the year. So, if you're an outgoing chapter leader and you're looking at this annual report, feel free to like bring in incoming officers to help you tackle that.
Also, just a plug to like, please give yourself time to answer it like fully and thoughtfully. In addition to us, like it helps us get a lot of really helpful information to better support you. So some of that is like member counts, but some of it is knowing like ways that chapters are funded or the lack thereof, feedback on ESW programs, feedback on your CRCs, just feedback on resources. There are a lot of things in there that really help us tailor what we do next year to better help you guys. So taking the time to fill that out is really appreciated.
Awesome. Yeah, so on that note, if there are no other kind of questions or comments, we can close a little early. We'll share out the link to this recording and then the slide that we'll share with some of the reminders, and I've jotted down a few others that we can add to the list as well. But that'll be shared out in just a kind of follow-up email. But before we close, last call for any questions, comments, thoughts. Okay.
Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to come and learn more about end of year transitions. And just to reiterate, if things do come up, feel free to post them in the Slack or to email your CRC.